The D.A.R.E program. If you attended elementary school in the US between 1983 and 2009, then you're probably familiar with the D.A.R.E program. And if you aren't, you were probably at least exposed to countless public service announcements with mascots telling you things like, "Don't talk to strangers," "Just say no," "Got milk," and "Where's the beef?" D.A.R.E was an acronym that stood for Drug Abuse Resistance Education, or according to that one smartass in 5th grade, drugs are really expensive or excellent. The Drug and Violence Prevention Education program was seemingly everywhere in the 80s through the mid-2000s. Parents, politicians, and police all praised the program, but science and studies show a different side to the story. One that already includes talking lions, child informants, and a catchy song. Now I get it, some of you D.A.R.E graduates might be smirking because you know exactly how this played out. But what exactly led to the downfall of D.A.R.E? Stick around to find out.
Marijuana is harmful. Just say no to drugs.
And if you do drugs, you go to hell before you die.
Using crack and cocaine to get high, that's what you say you love. But it's really insane, you could die.
Okay, now picture this. It's 5th grade. Your teacher says the class is going to be taking a break from the usual literature lesson. But hold up, where's the holy TV card of education? Sadly, there's no movie today, and instead you're greeted by a police officer with workbooks and lion stuffed animals. For the next 17 weeks, you're going to be learning about the D.A.R.E program. The Drug Abuse Resistance Education program was founded in 1983 in Los Angeles, California. This guy right here is Daryl Gates. He was one of the D.A.R.E co-founders. He was also chief of the Los Angeles Police Department from 1978 to 1992. Gates was also one of the people credited with the creation of SWAT teams and was chief of police during the infamous Rodney King riots in the early 90s.
I thought they were gonna kill me. That's what I thought.
He announced his intention to resign in 1991 after pressure and criticism from many stating that the LAPD had a problem with excessive force.
If it turns out that this is excessive in nature, we will take very stern action to deal with it.
Actor and rapper Ice Cube even dedicated a whole verse to Daryl Gates in a song, highlighting the tenuous relationship between law enforcement and the black community in Los Angeles at the time. Fun fact, Gates was also chief of police when the hit family-friendly song F the Police was released in 1988. Gates has been quoted saying, "Casual drug users ought to be taken out and shot." He later stated that it was calculated hyperbole and doubled down on the statement.
And then after me they said, "Did you mean it?" "Yeah, I mean it."
His own son had a history of substance abuse problems as well as a criminal record, so perhaps this is a reason for such a tough, no-nonsense stance on drugs. To get a better understanding of D.A.R.E's origins and the environment that forged it, we have to go back to the 1970s, to the start of the war on drugs. The United States was already in the middle of another war at the time. The Vietnam War had taken its toll on many U.S. servicemen and led to an increased addiction problem among veterans. President Richard Nixon declared drug abuse to be public enemy number 1 in 1971.
America's public enemy number 1 in the United States is drug abuse.
This led to increased spending, the start of the DEA, and the creation of federal demand reduction programs and drug treatment programs. Over $1 trillion has been spent since then fighting the war on drugs. This spending only intensified when Ronald Reagan became president in 1981.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
Reagan went hard on the criminalization of drug users, increasing penalties for offenders and tremendously increased the budget of the drug enforcement units of the FBI, including the DEA. His wife Nancy also joined in on the fun and helped start the Just Say No campaign in 1984.
Just say no.
A few years later, Ronald Reagan would announce the first National D.A.R.E Day in 1988. This annual presidential proclamation of D.A.R.E Day continued until President Barack Obama stopped doing it in 2012. Thanks, Obama. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive on the war on drugs, but I think it's important to highlight some of the shortcomings and criticisms of it since the D.A.R.E program was a product of it. The war on drugs has lasted longer than any physical war in United States history, but has it made any progress? One would think that 50 years into the war that we would have something to show for it, right? Well, it doesn't look like the drugs are giving up anytime soon. In fact, one unintended consequence of the war on drugs has been stronger and more potent drugs. For example, the US has tried to combat the supply of methamphetamine by heavily regulating key ingredients of the manufacturing process, but all this has done is reduce the amount of domestic producers and drive production south of the border. This is where the pure methamphetamine is coming from. Most of the efforts of the war on drugs have unsuccessfully focused more on the supply side of drugs rather than lowering the demand. History has taught us that when one door closes, another one opens. Any big bust or new regulation aimed at curbing drug production did nothing to stop the flow of drugs into the United States. Okay then, well what about crime? Did those increasingly huge budgets take a bite out of crime? Well... Thanks to harsher punishment and the mandatory minimum penalties, the U.S.'s incarceration rate blew up and is now the highest in the entire world. On top of that, most of the drug arrests have been nonviolent offenders rather than manufacturers or traffickers. It would make more sense to target the big guys and kingpins if the goal is to lower the supply. The government's focus on punishment rather than rehabilitation has led many experts to conclude that the war on drugs has been an overwhelming failure. So over $1 trillion and 50 plus years later, was it worth it? Well, if it wasn't for the war on drugs, we might have never gotten Breaking Bad, and honestly, that sounds like a pretty fair trade to me. Anyway, let's go back to the demand-based educational efforts of the war on drugs. While the Just Say No program did raise public awareness about drug use throughout the 80s, some say it was nothing more than fear-mongering and a catchphrase that oversimplified drug use for children and had no real impact on their behavior. We were seeing reefer madness level scare tactics in public service announcements as well as D.A.R.E learning material.
This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Whether your little brains were scrambled, fried, or sunny side up, these PSAs were inescapable. Even on Spanish TV. Es cocaína. These ads ranged from campy and goofy to straight out of your darkest nightmares. I mean, look at this. She looks like one of those creepy gang member rugs. Studies show that the use of scare tactics in drug prevention don't work because they make teens zone out. In fact, in some cases, vulgarity and humor work better than fear as a motivator. You know what? That explains a lot.
Whopper, 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 whopper.
Many of these PSAs and cartoons sensationalize drugs to young, impressionable kids.
She's beautiful. What's shaking, kids?
I mean, you can't tell me that these talking dog PSAs weren't the coolest thing ever.
Hey, I'm a dog. What's your excuse?
Hey, Lindsay. I wish you didn't smoke weed. You're not the same when you smoke.
You mean if I do this stuff, I'll be able to talk to dogs? I'll take 3. One of these ads even ran at the Super Bowl, Superb Owl, and claimed that drug users were funding terrorists. You know how expensive those ads for the yearly championship football game on the second Sunday of February are.
I helped murder families in Colombia. All the kids do it. I helped the bomber get a fake passport.
Whoa, 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 easy there, killer. The US government spent $3.4 million on the ad spots. The only thing crazier than the terrorism and the hefty price tags is the fact that the advertising agency the government hired to make the anti-drug ad was overcharging the government for their services. The agency agreed to pay $1.8 million to settle the claims, and 6 execs were found guilty. At least someone's benefiting from this crazy-ass government spending. It might not be the kids, but something, right? The US made it clear they were willing to spend the big bucks to accomplish their goal. Thanks to this lucrative government funding, D.A.R.E quickly grew beyond California to the rest of the country going into the 90s, eventually reaching the UK in 1995. At their peak, D.A.R.E was in 75 to 80% of American public schools. The original D.A.R.E curriculum was pretty simple. A trained police officer comes into your classroom for about an hour each week to teach a lesson, and this went on for about 4 months. In addition to drugs, the lessons also covered gangs, self-esteem, and decision-making. Now these are all inherently good things on D.A.R.E's part. I don't want that to get lost in translation. I genuinely think that the decision-makers had good intentions, but the execution of their vision did raise some eyebrows. Some classrooms were shown real drugs. Others were shown a smoker's lung to show the painful consequences of tobacco. You get showered with all kinds of goodies like pencils, bumper stickers, and KFC jackets. And then once you make it to the end of the 17 weeks, you graduate and you get this cool t-shirt. Not my class though. We got this lame-ass white t-shirt with rainbow text. I wanted the cool black and red. So I had to buy it myself so I could be like all the cool drug-free celebrities that wore it. Wait a minute. You really think someone would do that? Just put on an anti-drug t-shirt, go on the internet and lie like that? Before you come at me for the spelling on this, I didn't make it. This is actually straight from D.A.R.E's website. I don't know if D.A.R.E knows some of these people are wearing it as a joke or if they even cared. They just wanted kids to think D.A.R.E was hip and with it. D.A.R.E officers would put boxes in the classroom so kids could anonymously drop in questions they may have about drugs or report any concerns they had. I mean, this was even part of one of the lessons, the 3 R's: recognize, resist, and report. In this lesson, children were asked to answer questionnaires and encourage children to tell friends, teachers, or police if they find drugs at home. One student in particular may have taken this lesson too far. Crystal Grendel was 11 years old at the time when a guidance counselor at school asked her if her parents had used drugs. Her guidance counselor assured her that nothing would happen. She told the counselor that her parents smoked cannabis occasionally. Days later, Crystal would be approached by D.A.R.E officers and interrogated her, threatening that her parents would be arrested if she did not cooperate. To keep her from telling her parents, the officers warned her that often parents beat their children after their children talk to police. Despite Crystal's cooperation, her home was raided in April of 1991 and her parents were arrested. The D.A.R.E officers had not made any sort of living arrangements for Crystal and her younger sister. The officers were unable to find any nearby relatives and the girls were taken to a distant family member. Crystal and her mother would sue the police and the city 6 years later, citing economic hardship when the mother lost her job as a bus driver and a teacher's assistant. A federal judge awarded the family a civil judgment against the officers and condemned their actions, stating, "This type of coercive extraction of indicting information from an 11-year-old girl about her parents is reprehensible behavior unworthy of constitutional protection." I don't know, maybe the D.A.R.E officers simply just don't like Crystal. Despite the judge's ruling, irreversible damage had been done to Crystal and her family, and she was quoted saying, "I would never tell again. Never, never." Crystal wouldn't be the last child turned against their parents by D.A.R.E. D.A.R.E treated all drugs equally by saying they were all equally bad. A joint, a beer, and a line of coke were all evil in the eyes of D.A.R.E. and should be avoided at all costs. This zero-tolerance stance on all drugs has even led D.A.R.E to post this satirical article to their website. They've deleted it since then, but thanks to the Wayback Machine, we can take a look. Edible marijuana candies kill 9 in Colorado, 12 at Coachella. Spoiler alert, there have been 0 reported deaths from consuming marijuana, but somebody over at D.A.R.E got trigger happy and posted this article that was clearly a joke without fact checking it. Much like the PSAs, the scare tactics and fear-mongering used came at the expense of any actual educational value for the students. I know D.A.R.E operates under the framework set up by the Nixon administration, which produced the drug schedules still used today, but problem is, if you tell a kid a Schedule 1 drug like weed is just as bad as heroin, they're gonna start questioning things and your credibility. When they get to that age where some of them will no doubt experiment with substances and see that, hey, this weed stuff isn't as bad as my D.A.R.E officer said it was, they're gonna wonder if any of the other stuff you told them is bogus too. Some kids are pretty smart and will see through the smoke and mirrors. Pun intended. D.A.R.E may have managed to scare some kids off of drugs forever, but it was an introduction into the world of drugs for others and no doubt has led to experimentation for some. We all know a little rebel who will purposely do something you tell them not to simply because they're built different or because that'll never happen to them. Don't just take my word for it. By the mid-1990s, the cracks were showing and study after study after study came out, with each one reinforcing that D.A.R.E was ineffective at preventing drug use among the youth.
Pay attention, you're saying the same shit that he said.
One study even showed that D.A.R.E was associated with higher drug use among suburban kids. At best, any benefits of the D.A.R.E program were short-term and wore off within a few years. And how did D.A.R.E respond to the scientific community? By resisting education and suppressing studies. D.A.R.E lawyered up as the criticisms from researchers began to pile up. When the U.S. Justice Department approached D.A.R.E about conducting a large study on D.A.R.E's effectiveness, D.A.R.E America reached out to all the D.A.R.E chapters across the country and armed them with, quote, ammunition to respond to critics who charge that D.A.R.E has not proven its effectiveness. The Justice Department hired the Research Triangle Institute to do the study. D.A.R.E President Glenn Levant denied that they tried to squash any studies, but an internal memo from a meeting showed otherwise. It stated that Levant had criticized an early version of the study and had taken legal action to prevent widespread distribution of the report, spending about $41,000. They successfully prevented a second presentation by the RTI. Despite D.A.R.E's efforts, RTI still completed the study and it concluded that D.A.R.E did not reduce drug use. They even said that other drug education programs worked better. Officials and congressmen then called up the Justice Department asking them not to publish the RTI study, claiming it would set back the drug war. The Justice Department refused to publish the study despite requesting and funding the study. Luckily, it ended up being published by the American Journal of Public Health. I think Levant's feelings towards the scientific community can be best summed up by one of his quotes. Scientists tell you that bumblebees can't fly, but we know better.
Some people say the cucumbers taste better pickled.
What?
Huh?
Tensions between D.A.R.E and the research community were at an all-time high. Academics and parents groups claimed that D.A.R.E supporters were slashing tires, making threatening phone calls, and even jamming TV transmissions to silence the critics. D.A.R.E couldn't stop the truth from getting out, and some communities dropped the program. In 1996, Seattle Police Chief Norm Stamper dropped D.A.R.E, calling it an enormous failure. Still, D.A.R.E's popularity throughout the 90s going into the 2000s remained high. Researchers initially believed decision makers that kept D.A.R.E in spite of the research were unaware of the information out there, or that D.A.R.E had been successful with their lobbying. But it turns out that they were well aware of the research. While D.A.R.E might have missed the ball on the whole keeping kids off drugs thing, they pointed to the good relationships between police, students, and teachers that were built because of D.A.R.E as a positive. I still actually remember my D.A.R.E officer. She was a pretty cool lady, but that's all I remember from the D.A.R.E program if I'm being completely honest. This wasn't good enough for some scholars because D.A.R.E's original goal was to prevent drug use among kids, not any of these secondary benefits, and D.A.R.E was expensive, with some estimates showing that the program was costing taxpayers anywhere from $600 to $700 million a year. D.A.R.E was baffled why anyone would criticize the program, but failed to provide substantial evidence to support their cause, with one leader saying, "I don't have any statistics for you. Our strongest numbers are the numbers that don't show up." Levant compared criticizing D.A.R.E to kicking Santa Claus. They dismissed critics and painted them in a negative light and claimed that researchers just wanted the work for themselves, which undermined legitimate and valid concerns that they had about the program. One researcher stated, "D.A.R.E is the world's biggest pet rock. If it makes us feel good to spend the money on nothing, that's okay, but everyone should know D.A.R.E does nothing." Massachusetts City Councilor Peter G. Arlosasso said, "The tragic truth that the nation is spending $700 million a year on a program that may not work has not sunk in on the local or national levels. A large D.A.R.E bureaucracy has grown up that feeds on itself. The public raises no uproar because it needs the comfort of its delusion that something is being done to protect children from drugs."
D.A.R.E program.
We saved the city! Just think what might have happened if we didn't tell everyone about
drugs.
Going into the 2000s, criticisms were starting to reach Congress and things were coming to a head between D.A.R.E and the research community. The government sent the big guns in and the U.S. General Accounting Office had stepped in to do their own investigation. The results? The GAO echoed previous studies and found no significant differences in illicit drug use. This was almost a nail in the coffin for D.A.R.E because the U.S. Department of Education actually prohibits the use of federal funding for programs not backed by scientific-based research. The 2003 GAO report slashed D.A.R.E's funding. A year earlier in 2002, D.A.R.E had a budget of over $10 million, but by 2012 that had gone down to around $3.5 million. The U.S. Surgeon General had already placed D.A.R.E in the category of ineffective primary prevention programs in 2001. The researchers felt like they were fighting for their professional integrity, and D.A.R.E was basically fighting for their existence.
Fighting for my life! Yo, killing me with this!
D.A.R.E was forced to make a change or fade into obscurity. As a result, we finally got the much needed collaboration between D.A.R.E and the research community. D.A.R.E set up the D.A.R.E Scientific Advisory Board to oversee the project and had also invited some of the researchers that had published earlier studies. D.A.R.E's willingness to change was highlighted by D.A.R.E President Levant, who stated, "I'm not saying it was effective, but it was state of the art when we launched it. Now it's time for science to improve upon what we're doing." And as a result, in 2009, we got the Keeping It Real program. Cringy name aside, the Keeping It Real program fixed many complaints people had about the original D.A.R.E program. They shortened the 17-week program down to only 10 lessons lasting 45 minutes. They scrapped the long-winded lectures for more interactive sessions for the kids. The Keeping It Real program was developed by prevention scientists from Penn State and ASU. REAL was another acronym, man they sure love to use those, and it stood for Refuse, Explain, Avoid, and Leave. This was the much anticipated sequel to the original D.A.R.E program that finally told kids what to do after they had said no to drugs. Turns out just no wasn't enough. A reason this program works better is it's no longer branded as a drug prevention program and focuses more on making good decisions. They traded the scare tactics for a more honest approach that no longer makes kids feel like drug abuse is more rampant than it actually is. The Keeping It Real program claims to be more inclusive and integrates cultural aspects into the curriculum, even though their Spanish workbooks cost $50 more on their website. Gracias, D.A.R.E. Anyway, to D.A.R.E's credit, they acknowledge their faults and state on their own website that the original D.A.R.E program of the 1980s had minimal long-term influence on drug use. The Keeping It Real program removed references to cannabis in the curriculum, citing concerns that exposing children to it would only make them more curious about it. The Surgeon General has also reversed their stance on D.A.R.E and states that strong scientific evidence supports the effectiveness of prevention programs. Report states Keeping It Real has shown positive effects on substance use. D.A.R.E was worth saving for many because of its impressive infrastructure, worldwide network, and its extensive police training program. While the research may still be coming in on its effectiveness and the Keeping It Real program may not be perfect, their shift to embrace science, facts, and logic gives me hope for the future of D.A.R.E. The D.A.R.E story was not a simple good versus evil black and white tale. Cops, researchers, and teachers come from different backgrounds with varying interests, making this a very complicated issue. But the most important piece of the equation should be putting the kids first. Let's face it, drug and violence prevention is no easy task, and it's constantly evolving. Today's kids have to deal with things like a new opioid crisis, cyberbullying, and a bunch of other shit I didn't have to deal with when I was a kid. With illegal drug use among kids approaching a 30-year high, I hope D.A.R.E maintains this science-based approach and accomplishes their goal. So yeah, maybe that one smart-ass kid was right. Drugs are really expensive, but so is wasting your money on something that clearly doesn't work. If abstinence-only education worked, then this wouldn't be a thing either. And remember kids, say no to drugs and say yes to subscribing to Know This Is Alex.
Nobody's needing that crack and cocaine. There's terrible trouble behind it. And sooner or later you're burning your brain, making